I want to start today by asking a question. What is a great story that you have about overcoming obstacles? Now, these obstacles could be street obstacles. Maybe you have overcome a few cones in your time, or maybe there are other places that you have overcome obstacles. As I think about obstacles, though, the first one that comes to my mind anytime I think of obstacles and overcoming and persevering is WD-40. Now, does anyone know what WD-40 is? Or does everyone know what WD-40 is? Okay, is there anyone here that doesn't know what WD-40 is? It is a miracle product. You can use it to get liquid nail out of carpet. You can use it to get gum out of carpet. You can use it to take the squeak out of your doors. It is a miracle product. But do you know why it's called WD-40? I don't mind the smell of it. Now, that's probably not a thing to be saying too loudly, is it? That we sit there and huff WD-40 for joy. But what does anyone know the name? Linda, do you know why it's called WD-40? Well, exactly. 1 through 39 didn't work. Water displacement's what I was told. What'd you call it? Water dispersant. It took 40 tries to figure it out. So it's the 1 through 39 didn't work, but water disbursement for the 40th try. They finally figured out how to make it work. And now you got a miracle product that you can spray on about anything. I'm kind of like, was it My Big Fat Greek Wedding where the guy's like Windex? I'm kind of a WD-40 on that way. I'm like, WD-40 will fix anything. That and baling wire will fix it. Another story is the story of Walt Disney. You know the guy, not the company. Walt Disney was actually fired from a newspaper company because he lacked good ideas. He started his first animation company, and it went bankrupt in 1921. He created Walt Disney, the company that currently exists as an animation company, while he was eating dog food because he didn't have any money. And now look at it. Babe Ruth is another great example. Babe Ruth, who's Babe Ruth? Does anyone know? He's one of the greatest the hitters. He's just one of the best known baseball players of all time. Babe Ruth. But you know that Babe Ruth actually had another, this is what I found, is that he actually had another record as well, as the one with the most strikeouts in all Major League Baseball. We don't know about the failures as much as we know about his successes, but he was also a really good failure as well. And as we think about Babe Ruth, his comment whenever he was asked about this was, I just go up there and I swing, and I just keep on swinging, and I keep on swinging, and every strike brings me closer to my next home run. That was his comment about his record of being the one with the greatest strikeout. You ever find in life that there's a series of obstacles that you're overcoming? Hardships will no doubt face us. And as we look at life, there are things within this world and within our lives individually that are obstacles that we overcome. We can joke about hitting the obstacles on the road. We can joke about some other obstacles that are really meaningless obstacles in life, unless I guess you actually ruined your car hitting a cone. So don't hit the cone. But when I think about obstacles, what obstacles do you face? Today, my challenge for us is to think about the obstacles that we face, that we are experiencing in our lives. And then secondly, and the greatest point, are the ways that we can overcome those obstacles. The ways that we can be a people who overcome those obstacles. And Nehemiah and Ezra both are writing in a time period of obstacles. The overarching text for today comes from Ezra chapter 4, Nehemiah 4 through 6. We're going to focus on Nehemiah chapter 4 because that's probably the most concise section of text talking about opposition. And so as we are going to begin in Nehemiah chapter 4, we realize that in chapters 1 through 3, Nehemiah has primarily been focusing on the power of prayer and how prayer is a key secret that the spiritual person has. You and I have a strong, powerful tool in our arsenal called prayer. And we are told to keep rebuilding in Nehemiah in spite of the opposition, in spite of the difficulty, in spite of the boss who's going to be a pain in our backside, in spite of the people that we work with, the people who maybe even if you're in a service industry, the people who are going to be in your presence, who, boy, they're just trouble. But I also want to make sure that we think of the obstacle that is within us. Because sometimes the greatest obstacle we face is looking at us in the mirror. Sometimes the person that we are is the great obstacle that we face. And so in all of our discussion today, I want you to think of your obstacle. Whether that obstacle is someone outside, whether it is a situation, a circumstance, or whether that obstacle is on the inside. I want us to be honest about who we are and where our obstacles come from. And so as we look at Nehemiah chapter 4 primarily, we're going to come across some answers. How do we overcome the obstacles in our life? I have 3 points that I think Nehemiah shares with us. The first one is look to the Lord. Look to the Lord. Nehemiah chapter 4 opens, and if you're going to just kind of scan through the text, you're going to scan through quickly. You're going to see a couple of names. There's a guy by the name of Sanballat. I guess I'm pronouncing that right. But it opens with this guy named Sanballat and his friend Tobiah, who are leaders in nearby Samaria. They are individuals who never left. They were not taken into captivity. But they've been in the region. They are individuals who have remained around Jerusalem. Granted, they're a little north of it, but they're not that far. And their desire in Nehemiah chapter 4 is to maintain some sense of control over the region. For those of you with the history, that you just don't know the history of this, the captives in Babylon who are now under Persia have returned to Jerusalem. And Ezra and Nehemiah, they're rebuilding the wall, they're rebuilding the temple. And as they're coming back to rebuild, they're going to be putting out their flag and they're going to be saying, this is our home. But there's a whole bunch of people who never left, who they put their flag out 70 years ago and they said, this is our home. And so anyways, you have these two individuals, Sanballat and Tobiah, who are leaders in the nearby region, who are saying, this is our area. And they're going to fight tooth and nail. And they are planning every way possible to fight against Nehemiah. And if you're going to look at verse 4 and 5 with me, Nehemiah prays here in 4 and 5. Hear us, our God, for we're despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. By the way, he is praying to God about these two individuals. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from their sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builder. So when I look at what Nehemiah is saying, he is pretty strong in his language. Would any of you say that about your enemy? I don't want an answer. Because if you're going to be honest, you probably would. You might not pray it to God because you'd say God can't handle it. But if you jump down now to verse 9, this is where it gets good. 9, part A. What does he say? But we prayed to our God. But we prayed to our God. When opposition faces you, when opposition is looking you square in the eye, and you want to say verses 4 and 5 to God, when you want to say what 4 and 5 are telling you about the person that you're dealing with, the situation you're dealing with, when you want to say verses 4 and 5 to yourself, notice verse 9. But we prayed to our God. What actually opposes us today? What stands in your way? What is it that you face that's a great struggle? What is it that's holding you back? What opposition do you feel? Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 2, he gives us kind of this outline of some things that are opposing him, and he mentions the world as number one. The world is a place that by its representation is opposed to God. It is pushing back against God. It does not have an earthly or a spiritual outlook. Sorry, I had to get my words right. It does not have the outlook of what a heavenly realm is. And so Paul says that the world is very present. It's something that we will fight against. It's something that we will oppose. How many of you found yourself opposing the world? I mean, you don't have to read the newspaper very long. You don't have to look at Facebook too long. You don't have to do anything too long to realize that the world we live in is not exactly friendly to our persuasion of belief, is it? To a Christian worldview. Paul would say also in Ephesians chapter 2 that our very flesh, I said there's outward situations, but there's inward situations that maybe the desires that I have, I fight with. Maybe those are things that are always pushing on me and are always shoving against me and are always making me think where I'm at. Maybe it's the world. Maybe it's you. Paul also says, this is Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Paul also says that there's this spiritualness. We would call him Satan. Oh, have there ever been times where you felt Satan's just pushing against you? There ever been times where you could just feel the presence of evil in life and you knew, man, there is something going on here that is beyond my understanding, but it's evil, and I know it's evil. Oh, we have an opposition. And for those of us who would say that there is no opposition in our life, we are going to be deceiving ourselves because there is opposition. There are people pushing. In Nehemiah's day, he had a name. He knew who was pushing against him. And in his knowing who was pushing against him, he also knew where he could push back at. He says, man, these people, God, I hope you teach them what captivity was like. I hope you teach them how bad it can be. But verse 9, he prayed to his God. Now, what do you think is the greatest threat to Oklahoma as a church rebuilding in the future? Mind you, this series, The New Exodus, the thought behind it comes from a very interesting past 2 years. Things are different today than they are 2 years ago. They were 2 years ago. And I'm thankful for that. Difference doesn't have to be bad. Difference can be good, particularly if we evaluate why we're different. But what's different? What's different in the world? And if we can acknowledge what's different in the world, this idea of a new Exodus is that the world is different. We've moved into a new place. And as a church, as Oklahoma Church of Christ here on Outer Loop, we are in a different community than we were 2 years ago. And I hate to break it to you, the world that is living out in our neighborhood is changing. What do we face? What's our great struggle? I'm going to share with you a fear that I have. I think a great struggle that we're going to experience, that we are experiencing, I think every church is, so I'm not picking on us. But I think individualism is a struggle that we're going to have. And let me define what I mean by individualism. COVID taught a lot of us that we can stay home. Nothing wrong with staying home. If you need to stay home, stay home. Come out sick, stay home. You're unable to be out, stay home. I mean, I'm not going to knock the people who stay home because there's a reason to stay home. Those of you who are watching online, there's a reason to stay home. Do it. What I fear it has taught us, though, is that I can live my spiritual life with just me. You've heard it before. You'd hear guys who could say, well, I could find just as much God time while I'm out on the fishing boat on a Sunday morning. I'm picking on guys now. I can find just as much God time while I'm in my quilting room quilting, ladies might say. I can find just as much God time in all of these other areas of life when it's just me and God. And man, that's great, is it not? Isn't it wonderful when you can have alone time with God? What's the problem with that? You know, I'm meant to live in a community. The church was not designed for us to sit at home and to sit private, to sit by ourselves and to do private Bible study. That is your nighttime. That is your morning time. That is your special time. That is your Saturdays where you go on a walk. I don't care when that time is, but alone time with God is a great thing and you need it. But you are meant to be in a community of people. You are meant to be with a church. You are meant, God designed humanity to be together. So I don't know. I think the great struggle that we're battling and that we're going to battle, I think it's going to continue because I think the world has a fear of being close to one another. And if you want to say, well, Josh, that maybe that's just a church problem, why is it that civic clubs are declining? Why is it that churches are declining? Why is it that anything outside of your home is declining? Because as a society, we've stopped living together. I favor my back porch with a privacy fence over my front porch waving at my neighbors. That's why. And so when I'm looking at what Nehemiah is facing, I realize the opposition in his world is different. I realize that I have personal opposition that I have to overcome. You have personal opposition that you have to overcome. But as a church, as a people, we have to overcome our individualness. Now, what does this look like? It looks like this. When you choose the people you're going to hang around with, and those are the only people in your bubble. Oh, that's tempting for us. I like some of you. I like some of you even more. I love all of you. What's that? This phrase is, God told me I have to love everybody, but I like some. It's something like that, isn't it? I love everybody. I do. I genuinely do. But man, it becomes very tempting for us to say, well, I like certain people better, and so I'm going to make sure that those people always are in my presence. And what happens if I begin to pick and choose the people who are in my presence? What happens? And I can't even hear all of you, but I loved it all. You had a great answer. We're excluding others. We become lazy. We fail to grow. When we pick and choose and we create our groups that we stay within, there's nothing wrong with a group. I have a group of friends that they're my friends. But when I fail to have a church, when I fail to have a community that's people who disagree with me, I realize that individualism is the great threat to my growth. Jesus died so that I would be with you folks. Jesus died so that I would love you and you would love me and that we together would learn and grow. He died so that I would learn from you. He didn't die so that I could sit and have my own personal spiritual time. So when I come to the struggles of Nehemiah's day, I think the struggles that we're going to experience, what does it look like to rebuild? I think individualism has to die. I think we have to put the church as a community, as a people, back in the priority. The second point that I see in our text is I think there has to be, and this is kind of continuation of that thought, an encouragement to each other. Or we have to encourage one another. As they were opposing the work, these two guys, Sanballat and Tobiah, as they were opposing the work that Nehemiah was doing, we come down to verse 10, and you're going to notice what Nehemiah says. He says, in Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burden is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves, we're not able to rebuild the wall. By ourselves. Now, that's that individualism. That's whenever I look and I say, I can do it. And I'm preaching to myself for a moment. I can do it. There's too much work to be done if I look at it myself. Jump down to verse 14 now, though. And after I looked things over, I stood up," this is Nehemiah, "and I said to the nobles, the officials, the rest of the people, 'Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and their homes.'" What does Nehemiah do in verse 14? He is encouraging them. There's that scene at the end at the Braveheart. What's the actor's name? Mel Gibson. He's riding on that horse. I don't even know the scene. Y'all know the scene, don't you? It's one of those scenes that when you watch on the TV, you're like, I just feel fired up. I want to go do something. It is fight for your life. Fight for your family. And that's what I imagine Nehemiah saying here. If you want to picture Nehemiah as Mel Gibson and you want to read it in a Scottish accent, I think you could. But he says, don't be afraid. Remember who? It ain't about you. It ain't about how you feel, what you think, what you perceive. It ain't about you. He says, remember the Lord, who is great and wonderful. He encourages the people. He cheers them up. And if you're looking at this verse in particular, when he is encouraging, when he's lifting them up, he says, the first thing I notice is he says, you cannot think about you, you have to think about the Lord. Here's the reality. If you come and you tell me, you say, Josh, you did a pretty good job today, I'm going to say, you're lying to me. Because I know it's not me. If I'm looking at God, though, which is what verse 14 says, how good is my God? Has He ever left you? Has he ever left you completely alone, isolated, and struggling? There might be times it felt kind of like he was doing something you didn't like, but He ain't ever left you. And so when I come across this, I realize the first thing Nehemiah does is he stood up and Nehemiah begins to encourage. He begins to tell everybody. He tells people from the high-ups he's hoping this is gonna go on. And he tells them, first off, you got to get your eyes off yourself. You got to get your eyes off your situation. Stop thinking about all the rubble that's got to be moved. Stop thinking about all the trash that's that's got to be cleared, all the work, and start thinking about, one, how awesome your God is. And we serve an awesome God. And then what does he say? I think you said it, Mike. Was it you that said it? Think about your family. Think about your family. You know, there are things in my life that I want to change. And those things I want to change, if it's just dependent upon change for my sake, how likely am I to change it? I'm not. Change is difficult. It's painful. It hurts. Most people don't make change. When we make a change is when we know we've got someone that's going to depend on us. Oh boy, if Ashley said, I need you to make this change. How quick, gentlemen, would you make a change if your wife told you, you need to make this change? Matt, I know you'll answer me. How quick would you make a change? If that little lady says to make a change, we're going to make a change. Ladies, the same could be said for you with your husband. If your husband said, hey, we need to make a change, how quick would it take? If I'm making a change for my children, how quick would that change take place? There's no question. I make the change. It's amazing how family causes us to seriously consider what we're doing. It's amazing that when we look, and like he is saying, you're going to fight because you have an awesome God, but you're going to fight because you've got little children running around. You've got wives, you've got husbands, you've got people that depend on you. And you're going to fight for that. That's what verse 14 is saying. Don't be afraid. Remember the Lord and fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes. That's the whole speech of Mel Gibson. You're here to fight for, was it Scotland or Ireland? I don't even know. You know the movie. I'll have to go watch it. Scotland? He's fighting for, you are fighting for a reason. He encourages people. I don't know what your obstacle is. If I'm looking at individualism, I can tell you where it's going to lead to. Individualism is slowly going to lead to isolation. Isolation is going to slowly lead to depression. Depression is slowly going to lead to some way to fix it. Usually the quick fixes are drugs. But other fixes are going to be, we're going to find the wrong group of people to be around. Depression can manifest in multiple forms, and it's going to lead us into dark places. Isolation leads us into bad places because we weren't designed to be alone. God died for the church. Jesus died for the church. So when we look at this encouragement, I'm here to encourage you. You're here to encourage me. And finally, I guess I would ask it this way. Have you ever met someone who suffered from too much encouragement? I'm going to throw that question. Have you ever met somebody who said, I have just been encouraged too much, and I need less encouragement in my life? Think about that. That's your point. That's point number 2. Point number 3. You got to stay on guard. You can't let your guard down. When things start getting better, you cannot stop and say, well, you know what? Things are getting better, so I'm not going to worry about it no more. No. When things get better, you have to stay on guard. You can't drop your eyes. You can't set your defenses down. You cannot take a break. Because I told you, the world, this is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1, the world is always there. You are always there. And man, if you're by yourself, the things that you might struggle with in your mind, the battles you may have that you deal with, you know them. Satan, he is right there waiting. The evil of this world is waiting. But you have to stay on guard. Nehemiah, when they are rebuilding here, this is verse 18 I want to jump down to, verse 18. And each of the builders, who are these people? Starts with a B. And each of these builders wore his what? Wore a sword at his side as he worked. 21st century America, he kept his Glock in his pocket. Verse 23 now. Neither I nor my brothers nor my men nor the guards with me took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when he went for water. Why did Nehemiah do that? What? He was on guard. He was ready at all times. Do you know when Satan's going to come up and trick you? Do you know when you might even be tempted? Do you know when the world's going to set you off? If I knew that a burglar was coming to my house at 2:30 today, what would I do? There you go. Wait for him with my Glock out of my pocket. There you go. When we know that bad things are going to happen, we prepare for it. We can be somewhat aware. Now, some of us would say, well, we're going to have the house. I don't care. Make sure he burns it to the ground if he take everything. But if I know bad things are going to happen, I prepare for it. You don't always know when bad things are going to happen. I don't always know when things are going to pop into my head. Well, I don't know when someone's going to say something that's going to be a bad situation. I don't know when there's going to be opposition in my life. I can't tell you when those are going to happen. I wish I could. I wish I could give you a roadmap and would say that at this date, at this time, bad news is going to happen and it's going to cause you to struggle. I wish that I could do that so then we could prepare for it. And when it happens, you could say, you know what? I knew this was coming and I'm okay for it. I'm okay. It's going to be rough. I can make it. No. We don't know. So you stay on your guard. Now, what I think the 21st century church, what I think Oklahoma needs, how we stay on guard is this. As much as a Glock may be helpful at times, Ashley told me there was a shooting at the fair last night. I thought, that's what people were commenting on Facebook. I don't know if you can ever trust Facebook, but Yeah, I know. Believe it, the internet. Huh. I don't think that our great struggle that we need for the church today is to have a Glock in our pocket. Not that's probably not smart at times. We live in Louisville. It's not as bad as Detroit, right, Jim Hall? I think the thing that we need most today in Oklahoma and in our churches, but in our world, is spiritual discernment. I think that would be our Glock in our pocket for us, is spiritual discernment. Discernment is more than just knowing right and wrong. Discernment is the ability to judge what is the greatest of goods. Because sometimes in life we face situations where we are facing multiple good options, and we don't know what the right good to do is. We're also in life where we sometimes face multiple bad options. And when we face multiple bad options, what's the less of the bad options? Well, you hope to never have to be in those situations. But sometimes we are. And spiritual discernment is the ability to know our Bibles well enough, to know our God well enough, that we can make some informed decisions based on how God would want us to make decisions. True discernment means that we're not just distinguishing right from wrong. It means that we're placing things in priority. What is the most important thing in my life? And am I placing what is truly number one in the number one spot? I think that's a struggle we have. Is our God honestly our number one? Do we live our life like He is? That's spiritual discernment. The ability to look at life and to know, are we placing the things in the proper order that they deserve to be placed in? Why is discernment so important? I think just like Nehemiah, I'm not so much worried about my physical life as much as I should be worried about my spiritual life. And I hope the same's true for you, because I worry about your spiritual life, and I hope you worry about mine. I realize that in this discernment stage, in this idea of caring for one another, of staying on my guard, staying in a position, that I have to be prepared for anything at all times. Because I don't know what's coming. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what new thing's going to pop up. I don't know what new fear's going to happen. I don't know who's going to make it great and who's going to make it bad tomorrow for you. But I know that if I'm placing things in the proper order, if discernment has led me to make certain decisions in key places and in key ways, and to know that everything's going to be okay, if I have done those things, then I know it's going to be okay. Because I do know this. If I have put everything into the proper order, if I've placed my God as my number one, I hope you have. And if He truly lives as the number one spot in my life, that means He's number one over my wife, over my husband. He's number one over my kiddos. He's number one over my grandkids, over my great-grandkids. I don't know if there's any great-greats around here, but over my great-great-grandkids. If I've put my God as my number one, and if I judge everything in my life based upon the order that God has called me to judge them by, then I know it's going to be okay. This kind of brings me to my final question as I'm wrapping up Nehemiah 4. Why do we even want to rebuild when there's so much opposition? Why do I even worry about it? Why do I even concern myself with rebuilding spiritualness in our lives? I'll give you a simple answer, and it's the answer I want you to take home. You can use the answer yourself. I don't care. It's a good answer. I think the reason that we should fight the opposition that is the world, that is ourselves, and that is Satan, the reason we fight this opposition is because of the gospel. Jesus Christ died on a cross because He wanted to change the world. Jesus Christ died on a cross because He wanted to change you. He wanted to live in your heart, in your life, and He died because He wanted to conquer Satan. The gospel message is that Jesus conquered this world, that the world no longer matters, that the stuff of today, the stuff that all the trash that exists within our world doesn't matter. Jesus Christ died so that He could conquer you, so that you would submit to Him. It's about a submission to who He is. And He did this so that there would no longer be an accuser. So that no one would be in your ear saying, you're a failure, you're horrible, you can't do this. That's what Satan does. But the gospel message is a message of power, and it's a message of peace to our life. It's a message that gives us hope. So this morning, what do you need to give you hope? I know the battles are tough. I can't even imagine some of the battles you deal with. Some of you are incredibly brave people because the things that you are marching through or the things that you have marched through are things that I would never wish on my worst enemy. Some of you have gone through things that I hope never to experience. But I know that the gospel, in the middle of a cruel, horrible, wicked world, the gospel is a freeing and empowering message of how Jesus overcomes all of this stuff to yield us to an eternal life, to an eternal spirit. So my prayer for you, I think Ben Hall has our application. My prayer for you, my prayer asking Ben to kind of be mindful of is that each and every one of us would use the power of the gospel to be the encouragement to one another, to be the concern for one another, and to be the mind and the spirit and the goal and the blessing for each other. Ben, would you? If there's some way, after Ben's prayer, you need encouragement, I'll be right over here. Come and find me.
It's great being here today, God, that we can start the first day of the week and have a lesson like this where the things in the world that we live in kind of get brought to light that sometimes we overlook. That God, we face many obstacles in this world, and we fight through them. And oftentimes we do, as Josh said, we fight them alone, and we fight them in the worst possible way. And God, it's refreshing that we can sit here and reflect upon those. And that we can hear a lesson like this where we can kind of recalibrate, and that we can acknowledge that these obstacles, these oppositions that you lay before us, we're not alone. And that hopefully this message that we've heard, that it's refreshing to know that we aren't alone, that we can come to you, that you're always there. And God, it's not just about us. We have families, we have friends, and the ones that are going through these struggles, hopefully we encourage those as well. That the obstacles, that we do not take this path alone. And God, I guess the one I always think about is when sometimes we become short-sighted, and this message, as good as it is, that we just leave here and we forget. God, I implore you just to kind of keep this on our hearts, that we are on guard, that we remember that we're never alone, and that God, you are forever enough, always enough, more than enough, and that God, you're always with us, and that you sending your Son on the cross isn't proof of that. I don't know what else is. God, be with us. May you open our hearts to you, and that we are never alone, and that we always remember that. In your Son's holy name we say, amen.